Hello and welcome to another DMI Team Talk. This week we're looking at inclusive marketing, and this is in the lead up to Pride Month, which is next month for the month of June. So we thought it'd be timely to look at. So we're going to take a run today through a brief history of inclusive marketing. We're going to look at the numbers around it and how it actually does impact the customer's perception of your brand and how they interact with your company, engage with them, even in many cases increases purchases and things of that nature. And then we're also just going to look at maybe some of the things that yourself and your own digital marketing team can consider with communications going forward, particularly across your digital channels. But to begin, we look at what is now an iconic TV advert from 1971. This is Coca-Cola's iconic Hilltop advert. This was filmed in Italy, and they brought together people of all diversities, backgrounds, and it was very much the first time something like this had been done on TV. It was one of the first times where a brand had actually truly represented the people who were their customers. And so it kind of kicked off what later became known as inclusive marketing. To look at a more recent example, this is something you might have seen across different media outlets over the last couple of weeks. So Gucci, for the very first time, used their very first Down syndrome model, Ellie Goldstein. She was an 18-year-old model with Down syndrome. First time it had been done, but a perfect example of actually including specific groups within your marketing comms. And this went down particularly well with consumers of Gucci. It was actually their most ever liked post. It had over 800,000 likes, to give that some context. But overall, when we think of inclusion or inclusive marketing, there's a number of factors, but we've kind of broken down the main ones here on this slide in terms of what's actually relevant and what to be considering with your marketing communications when you're thinking of being inclusive. So the first is tone, and this is simply the tone in which you either address your customers or the tone of your marketing communications. It could be quite simply the text within your ads and so on. The type of language that you use, which type of words and which type of words have meanings in different types of cultures and contexts is very important. Representation, obviously, is huge within inclusive marketing. This speaks to who are you including in your comms visually. Let's say within an image, for example, do you have a representation of all the different types of customers that your company interacts with, engages with, sells to, or within the country or market that your company operates. Context kind of speaks to all of these points in some ways, but it's important to understand the context of a particular piece of language, a particular image, for example, and how it might be misconstrued then in a different location or a different market. We see many examples with context where companies who are marketing, let's say in India, for example, might misunderstand the particular context around a particular symbol or a particular use of imagery. One thing which is very important overall in inclusive marketing is to avoid appropriation. So you have to remember, as someone that's leading comms or involved in comms for a company, that where you take something that's particularly important to one particular culture and try appropriate it for a different use, let's say to make fun or to make something that's playful, it actually may come off or land quite badly because you are actually insulting that particular culture or that particular item, or whatever it is that you've actually taken and reappropriated. Counter stereotype is actually very useful for inclusive marketing. So that is basically shattering the current stereotypes, which are often, say, quite negative for certain groups, and actually rethinking them in your communication. And symbolism, again, kind of speaks to a lot of the points above, but be very careful with exactly what it is that you use in your video marketing, in your within your images or any of your comms, because we look, for example, let's say with Disney films, a lot of them were pulled recently. At the time, they were seemingly harmless, but certain cultural symbols were used in a kind of context, and to a lot of these points above, the language used and the kind of representation of people within the cartoons was not appropriate. And that speaks to symbolism in general, so something to consider as well. And there are more factors, but these are kind of some of the main ones when you think of your comms in general that you should be considering. But moving on from that, we should look at inclusive marketing in terms of the numbers, because actually it's very, very impactful with your customers and what they do or how they engage with you. A key piece of recent research was from Adobe, and they actually show that within the US, 66% of African Americans and 53% of Latino and Hispanic Americans feel that their ethnicity is actually negatively portrayed, or basically they're portrayed as stereotypes in a lot of advertising communications. And if we square that with something like the positive influence that inclusive marketing can have, 38% of consumers are actually more likely to trust you as a brand if you actually show an effort to provide diversity within your ads. So we see there that particular groups actually responding quite badly to depictions or stereotypes of their culture or how they feel about themselves. And we see, on the other hand, that actually overall in the market, all of us as consumers actually favor diversity, or that there's an overall positive impact or influence there. 69% of brands that actually made an effort in terms of inclusive marketing actually seen a stock rise last year, which is another incredible statistic, and the gain itself was 44%, which is a massive gain. So it feeds into the bottom line for a lot of companies. It's not just about improving communications for the sake of improving communications. A really good study for anyone looking to a bit of further research would actually be Ipsos and Google study from last year. It was from 2019 and 2020. But they took a sample size and they showed that overall, again, 64% of the sample that they took some kind of action when they seen an advert online, and we are specifically talking about Google ads here, that considered diversity and inclusion. And when we actually break away and look at specific groups, that uptick was even higher. So we see for Latinx plus, that was actually 85%, for Black or Asian communities, and again this is within the US specifically, but it was 79% for each of them. So a massive kind of uptick in action there. And to clarify for that study, what they were counting as action was either engagement, further views, consideration of the product, perhaps even in the form of a website visit and so on. So it was quite a broad spectrum of what they included in action, but still a very strong correlation there between the use of inclusion marketing and diversity, and actually a drive in action on the consumer's part. And there's two further graphs here towards the bottom of this slide, just actually drilling down into some of those details. So if we look at the LGBTQ consumers, they actually were 71% more likely to trust a brand that represented them authentically. And we see the same of Black consumers are more likely to interact with an ad that positively reflects their race or ethnicity, to 67%, to the effect of 67%. So very significant. And there's a lot of research that came out of that. And across the board for all different groups, we've seen much more engagement with brands if there was inclusion and diversity in some way. In terms of what you might be able to do as a business when you take all of this on board, there's a few different aspects, and it really starts from within the company in a lot of ways, and who is within your team. Your team can often be an asset in and of itself, but if you're thinking outside of your business, think of your target audience first. So many of us as digital marketeers, we build up personas, and we look at basically the different things that we can attribute to the main customers of our business. But often we don't drill down in these cases and think of ethnicity. We do maybe consider age first and gender, and then we map out a customer journey of some kind. But you should really align your communications to your local market or your overall market, and take into consideration all the different groups there, all the different separate groups there. So you can't start with age and gender, but ethnicity, sexual orientation, the location of people specifically, a rural location versus a city location, how people, self-identify in terms of their location, language preference, and even gender expression. And they should actually inform a further diversification of your personas, feeding in then into your kind of digital strategy. And when you're building personas, you need to consider what your customer experiences day to day in their own life and what is culturally and emotionally meaningful to them as a marketing communication. If you are thinking specifically in a digital marketing sense, you should also be looking at all your digital marketing channels and performing a digital marketing audit of those channels essentially. So look at your landing pages for your website. Does the cultural representation, the people that are depicted on your website, the text that you use, does it match back to diverse paid marketing communications, let's say from a Google ad or a social media paid ad? It really should match up, and it should be consistent in the customer journey all the way through. And this would include looking through photos, as I say, images, and just any touch point where there's a representation of what your customers are or who they are or what they look like, and it should all be consistent. But one key way for your business to actually drive and maybe even lead diversity is actually to bring diversity into your company. So hiring a more diverse team itself will actually enable you to tell authentic stories, as it says here, and design products and marketing messages that actually fit into the real experiences of different groups, and therefore help drive inclusion and representation of different people in a kind of meaningful way. Um, Specifically digital communication tips. So this is when you're considering your paid ads or any kind of organic content you're putting out in your channels. You should always aim to have more than one person in an image. Think of a campaign that you're running. If you're running sub campaigns, let's say different ad sets within a campaign, you should always test out different imagery. But we actually see that when you're representing the customer, now we find in recent studies that actually having multiple people within the one campaign is the best idea. And of course, those people should be a diverse representation of your target audience. You should use authentic and genuine imagery. Stock imagery in the context of representing a group's ethnicity, it doesn't go down well with your target audience. We see this time and time again through different surveys, and you should really look to actually make sure you go out and take your own photos and conduct your own kind of creative process and use genuine imagery, and reflect everyday life, and think back as well to one of the points on the previous slides. So you need to be familiar with your own market and location, and try reflect actually the day-to-day life of someone within the market that you operate, and not actors hired to play a part here, as it says. Creating a relationship, a visible relationship between people that is positive, is also key here, and including people in photos rather than the product only. So the product with a person or with someone who is in one of these kind of subgroups that you ought to be kind of representing in some way. Everyone featured with the same prominence as well. So again, if you are going to bring in diversity and you are going to include people, include them in equal measure. And maybe that perhaps goes without saying, but it's a common mistake to perhaps almost tokenistically start to include people, and that's almost as bad as excluding them in many ways. And try to represent the entire spectrum of people that you basically reach and that you're looking to communicate with. Now we look here at some examples, and we've chosen Pride examples because we're coming into the month of June, and it's going to be a month that represents an opportunity for your business to actually try be more inclusive, and have some fun and play into the actual month itself. So we look here at this example. This example here is from the nail polish brand Essie, and they had their first male representative in Jonathan Van Ness. Some of you might know him from the show Queer Eye, but it was very much a clever piece of inclusion marketing, taking actually the male category, who are a relevant subsection of their target audience and bringing them in and including them in their marketing comms. And it was very well done, and it ticked a lot of boxes in terms of, kind of engaging with your target audience in a more meaningful way, bringing someone representing the brand in a better, more inclusive way, and also actually the use here of someone that's quite well known and goes quite well with their brand and their brand image. If we look at another example here, this is a little bit more creative. Actually, it's L'Oreal, who are headquartered in New York, and in 2019, just as COVID began to affect us all, the Pride Parade in New York had to be basically cancelled for all intents and purposes. But what L'Oreal did was decided to include people actually in more way than one. They both included all of their gay and lesbian and you know different people of different sexual orientations within their marketing, but they also included people who were not going to be able to attend the actual Pride Parade itself. So what they did was remotely having their customers and different people within their organization take pictures of themselves. They had people send it in, and they actually built a float that they actually held a parade with, and the float gave images of all their customers, and it was just very inclusive all around. So it was a very clever piece of marketing. This example here is from a Nike campaign actually last year. So it ran under the campaign hashtag Be True, and it honored basically Black Roots of Pride, featuring LGBTQIA plus athletes, and brought them into the fold and made them part of their communications. And it was also a very important campaign in terms of, if you look at the wider context of sport, and as many of within the kind of sporting industry, or the kind of the sport space in general, inclusion is actually lacking in many countries. So it was groundbreaking in that sense for a big sports brand to do that. The same is true of this campaign. For anyone familiar with Paddy Power, who are an Irish and UK-based company, during the 2018 World Cup, they ran a campaign from Russia with equal love. So this was really Paddy Power going out on a limb within the host country of the World Cup in 2018, and actually making a bit of a statement about equal rights, particularly around LGBT plus. So it was a very clever piece of marketing, and it included a segment of their target audience that often don't get a lot of play in their marketing communications, and it went over very well even with people who are not in the LGBT plus kind of category. So for any of you, though, that are looking for further reading, understanding, and examples of this particular subject, because it is something that very much needs to be seen and consumed a little bit to get a sense of how best to do it, we have a number of different resources for you to look through. One in particular is actually our recent DMI roundtable, which focused on diversity and inclusion. For power members of the Digital Marketing Institute, that would be available on your platform to go and view. Other resources on our platform would include articles such as Inside the Rainbow. There's 3 really great examples of Pride marketing campaigns there, which might inform your activities coming up into next month. We have a case study there actually around World AIDS Day as well, which is very relevant. A great podcast around influencer marketing, which actually brings a lot of this into consideration, inclusion and diversity as it relates to influencers particularly. And then we have some other related articles here which actually will feed in quite well to your understanding of this topic. So when a brand fails its community, and stronger together the power of community. Go check all of them out. They're linked. We will actually link them in the comment section below. But to join in the conversation, if you're a DMI student, we're actually going to, we have a thread there, digital marketing, diversity and inclusion, and we'd invite you to come in and give us your opinion on the state of digital marketing, inclusion and diversity in 2021, and where you think it might be going, or even ask us a question there in the forum, and we'd be happy to kind of have that conversation. And I just also say to anyone watching today, if you find this helpful or useful, please do share, like, or tag a friend in it if you think it's going to be a useful resource, or if indeed any of the recent DMI team talks are a useful resource. We're happy to have the message or the information out there to as many people as possible. And finally, I'd just like to say thank you, and I hope to see you all again very soon for an upcoming DMI team talk. Thank you.